Ever wonder how cowboys survived days from civilization using just a knife, rope, and canteen? How a single match meant the difference between warmth and freezing? How salt preserved meat for weeks? How a harmonica kept cattle calm during deadly stampedes? This is frontier survival, where every item earned its place. Let's start with the most essential item any cowboy owned, his knife. You remember that feeling when you finally got your first real pocket knife as a kid? How it felt like suddenly you could handle anything. Now multiply that by 1,000. A cowboy's knife wasn't just a tool. It was his workshop, his dinner table, and his emergency room, all folded into 6 inches of carbon steel. The best ones came from Sheffield, England, or later from American makers like Case. You'd feel the weight of it on your belt every single day, usually hanging from a leather sheath that grew soft and dark with age and oil from your hands. When you needed to cut a rope tangled around a spooked horse's leg in the middle of a stampede, you didn't have time to think. Your hand went to that knife automatically, and the blade better be sharp enough to slice through hemp with one pull. Cowboys used their knives to cut tobacco, dig out splinters that would fester in the heat, trim rawhide for repairs, clean game, even perform crude surgery on injured cattle or themselves. The blade required constant care. Every night by the fire, you'd see men running whetstones along their knife edges with methodical precision, because a dull blade out there wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Can you imagine trusting your life to something that cost maybe $2 but required that much daily attention? Next came the bedroll, and this wasn't some lightweight camping accessory. You felt the heft of it. 40 pounds of canvas tarp wrapped around wool blankets that smelled like wood smoke, sweat, and the particular musk of whatever ground you'd been sleeping on. The outer layer was typically an 18-ounce canvas tarp, treated with linseed oil to make it water-resistant. When you spread it out at night, you could still feel the stiffness from that oil treatment, and it made a distinctive rustling sound that became the soundtrack to every cowboy camp. Inside, you'd have 2 or 3 wool blankets, never cotton, because cotton killed you when it got wet. Wool kept you warm, even soaking wet, which happened more than you'd think. Spring rivers during cattle drives could rise overnight. Flash floods appeared out of nowhere. You learned to set your bedroll on high ground or pay the price. The entire setup rolled tight with leather straps, and you lashed it behind your saddle where it rode all day, getting coated in trail dust that worked its way into every fiber. At night, you'd shake it out, and you always shook it out because scorpions and spiders loved the dark warmth. Then spread it on ground you'd cleared of rocks and cactus. The canvas went down first as ground cloth, blankets on top. If you were lucky, you'd keep one blanket clean enough to wrap around yourself. If rain came, you pulled that canvas over you like a cocoon, lying there, listening to drops hammer the oiled fabric inches from your face. Did you ever sleep outside and wake up so cold your joints ached? The canteen might look simple, just a tin or glass container covered in cloth or leather, but understanding how it worked reveals everything about cowboy life. Most canteens held between 1 and 2 quarts. Let me put that in perspective. In desert heat, working hard, a man needs about 2 gallons of water per day just to survive. You're carrying maybe half a quart per hour of hard riding, maximum. The canteen itself was usually made of tin-plated steel, sometimes glass if you could afford it, and trusted yourself not to break it. The covering served 2 purposes. First, the cloth or canvas covering could be soaked with water, and evaporation would cool the contents, a primitive but effective refrigeration technique that could keep water maybe 10 degrees cooler than ambient temperature. Second, it protected the metal from denting and your leg from burning, because metal in the sun got hot enough to brand cattle. You wore it on a strap across your body, and the weight of it, 4 pounds when full, pulled constantly at your shoulder. You learned to ration water like a miser. 3 small sips in the morning, 2 at midday. Save some for your horse, because a horse that goes down from dehydration is a death sentence. Cowboys developed this ability to function while desperately thirsty, their lips cracking, mouths full of cotton, because the next water source might be 20 miles away. You'd study the landscape obsessively, reading where water might be, the flight patterns of birds, the green of distant vegetation, the smell of moisture in the air. When you finally reached water, you didn't just guzzle it down. You drank slowly, let your body adjust, because drinking too fast after severe dehydration could make you sick. Remember the last time you were really, genuinely thirsty? Not just ready for a drink, but desperate? Matches were precious in a way modern people cannot comprehend. A box of sulfur matches, maybe 50 of them, represented fire, warmth, cooked food, and survival. Before the 1830s, cowboys carried flint and steel, striking sparks into charcloth or tinder. The invention of the friction match changed everything, but these weren't the reliable matches you know today. Early sulfur matches were temperamental. Humidity could ruin an entire box overnight. You kept them in a waterproof tin container, usually a small brass or tin case that sealed tight. Some cowboys coated each match head with paraffin wax for extra protection. You learned to light fires with one match because wasting them was unthinkable. The technique involved preparation, gathering your tinder first, dry grass, bark shavings, anything that would catch from a spark, then arranging kindling in a careful structure with enough airflow. You'd strike the match on a rock or the tin, cup your hand around the flame to protect it from wind, and touch it to your tinder pile in exactly the right spot. If that match went out, you had 49 left to last you weeks or months. Cowboys became obsessive about fire safety, never leaving a fire unattended, always drowning it completely before moving on, because a wildfire in dry grassland could destroy everything for 100 miles. The smell of a sulfur match striking, that sharp, acrid burst, became associated with safety, with hot coffee, with surviving another cold night. Have you ever tried to start a fire with just one match? The rope was a cowboy's most versatile tool, and I'm talking about a 60-foot length of 3/4-inch hemp or later manila fiber rope that weighed about 20 pounds and represented months of wages. Before you even start thinking about fancy lasso tricks, understand what this rope actually did every single day. The fibers were twisted tight, hemp from cannabis plants, later manila from abaca plants, creating a rope that was simultaneously strong enough to hold a 1,000-pound steer and flexible enough to coil smoothly. A new rope was stiff, almost hostile. You had to break it in by dragging it behind your horse, working oil into the fibers, coiling and uncoiling it hundreds of times until it became supple. The rope hung in a specific coil on the right side of your saddle, arranged so you could grab it and shake out a loop in one motion. Cowboys practiced roping constantly because your technique had to be perfect under pressure. When you're chasing a running calf through brush at full gallop, you get one throw. Miss, and that animal disappears into rough country. The physics of throwing a lasso involve creating a loop with a Honda, a reinforced eyelet at one end that the rope slides through, then spinning that loop overhead to build momentum while judging distance, speed, and wind. You release at precisely the right moment, and if you've done everything correctly, the loop drops over the target's head or catches its legs. Then comes the dangerous part. You dally the rope around your saddle horn. Never tie it because you need to release instantly if something goes wrong, and your horse sets back, absorbing the shock of stopping a running animal. Men lost fingers dallying wrong, getting them caught between rope and saddle horn. The friction could strip skin off in a second. Beyond roping, this same rope pulled wagons from mud, replaced broken harness, tied down equipment in storms, created makeshift corrals, served as a clothesline, and in emergencies, could even be unraveled for the fibers to make repairs. Every foot of that rope had saved someone's life at some point. Do you remember learning to tie your first real knot? The gun gets all the attention in Western movies, but the reality was far more mundane and far more carefully calculated. Most cowboys carried a revolver, typically a Colt single-action army or something similar, but not for the gunfights you've seen on screen. This was a tool, plain and simple, and an expensive one. A Colt Peacemaker cost about $17 in the 1870s, which represented nearly a month's wages for a working cowboy. The weight of it on your hip, 2.5 pounds of steel and walnut, became so familiar you felt unbalanced without it. The gun served specific purposes, putting down injured livestock, signaling across distances when shouting wouldn't carry, and yes, protection against predators. But we're talking about rattlesnakes and mountain lions, not outlaws. The mechanics of these revolvers required constant attention and a deep understanding of how they worked. The single-action design meant you had to manually cock the hammer before each shot, and that hammer rested on an empty chamber because carrying 6 rounds with the hammer down on a live. Cartridge was asking to shoot yourself when your horse stumbled, so you loaded 5, left 1 empty, and that meant counting shots in your head became automatic. The gunpowder residue from black powder cartridges, before smokeless powder became common in the 1890s, would gum up the action after just 20 or 30 rounds. You had to field strip the weapon regularly, cleaning each part with oil and a rag, using a bronze brush to scrub the cylinder chambers, running patches through the barrel until they came out clean. Neglect this, and the cylinder would freeze up, or the hammer wouldn't fall properly when you needed it most. Cowboys also carried ammunition carefully, usually in loops on their gun belt, and that ammunition had to be kept dry because moisture could seep into the brass casings and kill the primer. You learned to inspect each cartridge before loading, looking for corrosion, dents, or any sign of compromise. The sound of a revolver firing, especially indoors or in a canyon, was absolutely devastating devastating to your ears, a concussive blast that left them ringing for hours. Most cowboys who fired guns regularly for years ended up partially deaf. When did you last hold something that required that much constant maintenance just to function? The harmonica seems like a luxury item until you understand what isolation really means. Imagine weeks on the trail with the same 15 men, no other human contact, nothing but cattle and dust and the sound of hooves for 12 hours a day. The human mind needs stimulation or it starts to crack. A harmonica, usually a 10-hole diatonic model from Honor or a similar maker, cost about 50 cents and weighed 2 ounces, but its value was incalculable. The construction was simple. Brass reeds mounted on a comb, usually made of wood, sealed inside metal covers. When you drew breath in or blew out across a hole, the air made the reed vibrate, producing a note. Different hole positions and breathing techniques created melodies. The instrument fit in your shirt pocket and could survive the same abuse you took all day. After dinner, when the fire burned low and men sat staring into flames, someone would pull out a harmonica and start playing. The sound cut through the night, reedy, slightly melancholic, human. Red River Valley, streets of Laredo, Shenandoah. Songs everyone knew, songs about home and loss and longing. Other men might join in singing or they'd just listen, each lost in his own memories. The harmonica required care in that climate. Moisture from your breath would collect inside, and in freezing temperatures, that moisture could crack the wooden comb or rust the reeds. You'd tap it out after playing, shake the moisture loose, maybe warm it by the fire to dry it completely. Some cowboys got good enough to play while riding, finding a rhythm that matched their horse's gait. The music served another purpose too. Singing to cattle at night kept them calm. A nervous herd could stampede at the slightest sound, a coyote's howl, a sudden crack of thunder, but steady music soothed them. Night riders circling the herd would sing or play harmonica for hours, fighting their own exhaustion with melody, keeping thousands of animals calm through the dark hours. Can you remember a time when music was the only entertainment you had? The whetstone was a 4-inch rectangle of Arkansas stone or similar fine grit material that rode in a leather pouch on your belt. It felt smooth and slightly oily because you kept it treated with mineral oil or animal fat to help the sharpening process. Every edge you owned dulled constantly. Your knife, your axe, even your spurs needed touching up. The technique of sharpening was something you learned by feel. You held the blade at a 20-degree angle to the stone, or you knew you did because your hands remembered, and you made long, sweeping strokes, alternating sides, maintaining consistent pressure. The sound was distinctive, a whisking, rhythmic scrape of steel on stone that carried across camp. You could tell by the sound when a blade was getting sharp, when the edge was catching the stone just right. Testing sharpness, you'd carefully draw the blade across your thumbnail, not cutting, just feeling for that bite that meant the edge would catch and not slide. Or you'd try to slice a single hair, holding it taut and bringing the blade across. A truly sharp knife would cut the hair cleanly. This ritual of maintenance happened constantly. Morning coffee was brewing and men sat sharpening their knives. Evening after dinner, same thing. The whetstone itself would wear down over months and years, developing a hollow in the center from thousands of strokes. Some cowboys carried 2 stones, a coarser one for damaged or very dull edges, and a fine one for finishing. Water or oil on the stone helped float away the metal particles and kept the surface cutting effectively. You learned to read an edge by touch, running your thumb perpendicular to the blade to feel for burrs or imperfections. A well-maintained edge could make the difference between cleanly cutting through a rope in an emergency or sawing uselessly while disaster unfolded. The patience required to properly sharpen something, stroke after stroke after stroke, taught a kind of meditation. Your hands knew the work and your mind could wander. Ever spend an hour making something sharp? Coffee wasn't a comfort. It was a necessity that bordered on addiction. Cowboys drank Arbuckle's roasted coffee, which came in 1-pound paper packages with a peppermint stick inside as a prize. The coffee itself was pre-roasted, a revolution at the time because it meant you didn't have to roast green beans over a fire. The grounds were coarse, almost chunky, dark brown and oily, with a smell that promised alertness and warmth. Making cowboy coffee was a specific process that produced a brew strong enough to strip paint. You started with cold water in a battered tin coffee pot, usually blackened from sitting directly in flames hundreds of times. Bring that water to a rolling boil. Add coffee grounds directly to the boiling water, about 2 tablespoons per cup, but really you just eyeballed it, usually erring on too much rather than too little. Let it boil for a few minutes, watching the grounds swirl and dance in the roiling water. Then came the crucial step. You removed it from heat and added a splash of cold water. This made the ground sink to the bottom instead of floating in your cup. Or you added a crushed eggshell if you had one, which somehow clarified the brew. The resulting coffee was thick, bitter, hot enough to burn your mouth, and absolutely essential. You drank it black because milk was a fantasy and sugar was a luxury. The caffeine hit your system like a slap, sharpening focus that had gone fuzzy from 4 hours of sleep and 10 hours of work ahead. The pot stayed on the fire all day, getting more concentrated and more vicious as water evaporated and someone kept adding grounds. By afternoon, the coffee could dissolve a horseshoe. You drank it anyway. The tin cup burned your hands, so you learned to hold it by the handle or wrap a bandana around it. That first sip in the morning, bitter, scalding, real, meant you were alive for another day. Coffee grounds were reused until they gave up every molecule of caffeine, then scattered on the ground where they'd nourish nothing because the soil rejected them as too hostile. Some cowboys carried their own personal stash of coffee like it was gold, which essentially it was. When did you last need coffee rather than want it? The spare cinch might seem like boring equipment until you're 30 miles from anywhere and your saddle cinch breaks. The cinch is the wide strap, usually mohair or cotton woven into a thick band, that goes under your horse's belly and holds the saddle on. It takes tremendous stress every time you mount, every time the horse moves, every time you rope something and the saddle absorbs shock. The fibers weaken from sweat, friction, and age. Cowboys carried a spare cinch rolled up and tied behind their saddle because a broken cinch meant you couldn't ride, and not being able to ride meant you were as good as dead in open country. The cinch attached to the saddle with leather latigos, long straps that threaded through rings on the saddle and the cinch itself, creating an adjustable connection you could tighten or loosen. The knot used was typically a latigo knot or a variation of it, something that held firm under pressure but could be released quickly when needed. You learned to check your cinch every single time before mounting, running your hand under it to feel for wear, looking for broken fibers or weak spots. Horses also had this annoying habit of puffing up their bellies when you first cinched them, then letting the air out after a few minutes of walking, which meant your saddle would be loose and could roll sideways if you didn't retighten after mounting. A saddle that rolled while you were on it was a good way to break bones or get trampled. The spare cinch also served emergency purposes. It could become a temporary harness strap, a sturdy rope, even a tourniquet if someone got hurt badly enough. The weaving of a good cinch was tight and even, with reinforced edges to prevent fraying. You kept it dry when possible because wet mohair stretched and weakened, and you checked it regularly for damage even though it was just the spare. Have you ever relied on a backup plan that you hoped you'd never need? The sewing kit was a small leather pouch containing needles, thread, scissors, buttons, and maybe a thimble. Cowboys learned to sew because there was no alternative. A ripped shirt in winter meant frostbite. Torn pants kept tearing until useless. You sat by firelight, threading needles with calloused hands, making small, even stitches that wouldn't pull loose. For heavy leather, you pre-punched. Holes with an awl, a sharp spike that pierced what needles couldn't. The saddle stitch used 2 needles on 1 thread, passing through each hole from opposite directions, creating seams stronger than the original material. Thread got waxed with beeswax for water resistance. You'd repair the same weak spots repeatedly, building layers of thread until they were thicker than surrounding fabric. Buttons were precious. Lose one, and you used a thorn or bent wire. Remember the first time you had to fix something yourself because nobody else would? Salt wasn't comfort, it was survival. Cowboys carried it in leather pouches or tins, kept meticulously dry. Your body lost salt through constant sweat, and without replacing it, you got cramps, weakness, heat stroke. A pinch in your water helped retain fluids. Salt preserved meat. Rubbing it into every surface drew out moisture and prevented bacterial growth. Salted meat lasted weeks, turning hard and dark but staying edible. Salt was also currency for trading with Native Americans and essential for livestock health. Animals would travel miles for it. The taste on bland food after weeks made your mouth water instantly. Pure salt on wounds burned viciously but cleaned infection better than anything else. When did you last crave salt so badly you could taste it in your imagination? Tobacco came as loose leaf in leather pouches, sometimes pre-rolled cigarettes or chewing tobacco. Rolling a cigarette required skill. Pinch tobacco onto thin paper. Roll it tight with your thumbs. Lick the edge. Seal it. You could do it in the dark, in wind, while riding. That first harsh draw sharpened focus and dulled hunger. Cowboys smoked during night watch to stay alert, to calm nerves, to occupy their hands during endless cattle watching hours. Chewing tobacco sat between cheek and gum, releasing nicotine while you worked, and you'd spit brown juice constantly. Tobacco also served as emergency antiseptic for wounds. The nicotine had antibacterial properties, though packing a wound with it hurt worse than the injury. Running out meant withdrawal, headaches, irritability, inability to focus, or trading something valuable for more. Do you remember picking up a habit you knew wasn't good but couldn't quit? The spare horseshoes and tools were critical because a lame horse meant disaster. Shoes protected hooves from excessive wear, but they took tremendous abuse. Each iron shoe attached with 6 to 8 nails driven through the hoof wall, and these loosened from constant impact. A thrown shoe meant exposed hoof that would chip and crack within miles. Cowboys carried spare shoes of various sizes, plus a rasp, hoof knife, hammer, and nail pullers. Replacing a shoe was brutal work. You held the hoof between your legs, bent over, cleaned it thoroughly, trimmed if needed, then fitted and nailed the shoe. Each nail had to seat at exactly the right angle or you'd cripple the horse. The whole process took an hour minimum, kneeling in dirt, swatting flies with the herd moving on without you. But you did it because the alternative was walking. Ever had to fix something critical when you were already exhausted? The rifle scabbard was a long leather sleeve protecting your Winchester or similar rifle while keeping it accessible. The scabbard hung from your saddle with the butt forward for quick access. This wasn't about gunfights. Grizzly bears needed stopping power revolvers couldn't provide. Wolves harassing cattle required distance shooting. The lever-action Winchester held 15 rounds and cycled quickly, but powder residue gummed up the action and required constant cleaning. You'd field strip it regularly, scrubbing the barrel with oiled patches, wiping every metal surface, checking springs and magazine followers. The wood stock absorbed moisture and needed oiling to prevent swelling or cracking. Ammunition was heavy. 50 rounds added 3 pounds, but you carried it anyway. Can you imagine being your own protection when help was days away? Spare bridle reins were thin leather straps you carried rolled up because primary reins constantly snapped from stress. Riding with one rein was dangerous, almost no directional control. Both broken meant you were a passenger on a 1,000-pound animal that might bolt. You'd tie broken reins back together or replace them entirely using Chicago screws or leather tie strings. The reins also became emergency lead ropes, gear straps, even tourniquets. That thin leather strip represented control and safety. Jerky was meat sliced thin, salted heavily, then dried over fire until hard as leather. It provided portable protein requiring no preparation. You'd tear off pieces and chew for minutes, letting saliva rehydrate it. Intensely salty and smoky, it kept you alive when there was nothing else, though after weeks you could barely choke it down. The axe, a 3-pound head on a 2-foot handle, turned landscape into shelter and fuel. You'd read wood, grain, and strike at angles that leveraged the wood structure, working into a rhythm you could maintain. Keeping it sharp was critical because dull axes bounced dangerously. You used it for splitting wood, driving stakes, clearing campsites, shaping repairs. The handle wore smooth from thousands of grips. The tarp was 8 by 10-foot canvas, oil-treated for waterproofing, that created shelter when storms came. You'd rig it as a lean-to using rope and stakes, or wrap gear to keep moisture out. In river crossings, it waterproofed supplies or became a crude raft. Cowboys hung tarps as windbreaks, spread them for ground insulation, used them to collect rainwater. Tiers needed patching or they'd spread. The tinderbox held char cloth, cotton charred in low oxygen that caught sparks instantly, plus flint and steel striker. You'd strike steel against flint, landing sparks on char cloth, then transfer the glowing ember to a tinder nest and blow it into flame. This backup system meant fire, even when matches failed. Spurs were metal rowels on your boot heels for refined horse control. You used them with subtlety. A heel rotation asked for speed or direction change. Good riders used invisible cues. Poor riders created nervous horses. The jingle announced you coming, and walking without that familiar weight felt wrong. The compass was a brass case with a magnetized needle pointing north. In featureless terrain where landmarks were sparse, knowing direction meant survival. You'd take morning readings, check periodically to stay on course. Combined with time tracking, 4 miles per hour walking, 8 trotting, you could dead reckon position accurately. The awl was a pointed spike for punching holes in leather too thick for needles. You'd position material firmly, then push and rotate to drive the 4-sided point through. It also cleaned horse hooves, marked leather, created drainage holes, even served as improvised weapon. The point dulled gradually and needed sharpening. The Bible was typically small, leather-bound, with thin pages from constant handling. It connected you to family, provided entertainment during downtime, offered comfort processing harsh realities. Some read it cover to cover repeatedly. Others focused on specific passages. The physical object was valuable enough to trade in desperation, though most avoided this from emotional attachment. Loading gate tools cleaned your revolver's hinged cover that allowed loading cartridges. Dirt and powder residue packed into the mechanism, causing it to stick. If the gate wouldn't open, you couldn't reload. You'd use thin metal picks to scrape away gunk carefully, then oil the hinge and work it repeatedly. Wire, typically baling wire in coils, was versatile for repairs. Unlike rope, it wouldn't rot or burn. Cowboys used it for broken tack, split wood, loose wagon parts, improvised splints. You'd overlap ends and twist tight, bending as few times as possible since repeated bending work-hardened the metal until it snapped. Wire cut badly if you weren't careful. Gloves were heavy leather work gloves protecting hands from rope burns, thorns, and heat, thick enough to resist abuse, but flexible for fine control. They started stiff, broke in over weeks, and molded to your hand shape. You'd oil them occasionally, patch holes before they worsened. Without gloves, rope stripped palm skin, thorns lodged deep, blisters formed and bled. The mirror was 3 inches of polished metal or glass for checking your face while shaving, inspecting injuries, removing splinters. After weeks without checking, you could develop infected cuts without knowing, but it also reminded you that you were still human, still an individual, not just a working animal. Matches were sulfur friction matches, maybe 50 per box, representing fire, warmth, cooked food, survival. Early matches were temperamental. Humidity ruined entire boxes overnight. You kept them in waterproof tins, sometimes coating heads with paraffin. You learned to light fires with one match because wasting them was unthinkable. The technique involved gathering tinder first, then one careful strike. The harmonica, a 10-hole diatonic model, cost 50 cents, but its value was incalculable. After weeks with the same men and nothing but cattle and dust, the human mind needed stimulation, or it cracked. Someone would pull it out after dinner and play Red River Valley or Shenandoah, and that reedy, melancholic sound cut through the night. Music also calmed nervous herds that could stampede at any sound. Now you understand. These items were the absolute minimum to survive in one of the harshest environments humans ever worked in. Every item had multiple purposes, required constant maintenance, and represented knowledge passed down from those who learned the hard way what you couldn't live without. What's something from your life you'd take everywhere if survival depended on it? If you enjoyed this video, check out our other awesome videos on the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.